Ron. Where is Ron right now?
Ron is present. Guys, let's just jump right into it. Yesterday was the first day of testimony in the Danny Masterson / Scientology criminal trial. Scientology isn't officially on trial here, but in some ways it is. But for this story, what's most important is the ways in which it isn't. Because after the first day of testimony in the trial, the defense ended the day by asking for a mistrial. Now, the judge very quickly denied that motion, but let's get into the series of events that occurred on the subject of Scientology that caused the defense to move for a mistrial. Now, the judge has been very clear in this case that Scientology, information about Scientology questions and answers are going to be permitted to the degree it explains the state of mind of the victims with respect to why it took them so long to go to the official authorities regarding the attacks by Danny Masterson. In other words, the court has ruled that it is relevant to the case that Scientologists are prohibited from reporting each other to the civil or criminal authorities. It is relevant for the jury to understand that this factor, among others, impact the victim's state of mind. The judge has determined it is also relevant, for example, for the jury to understand the extent to which these Scientologists' worlds were completely enmeshed in Scientology and with Scientologists, and therefore the threat of expulsion from Scientology by virtue of violating the rules regarding reporting other Scientologists to the authorities, that this threat of expulsion would carry enough weight with these women that it would have a very meaningful impact on their state of mind and would have prevented them from going to the authorities. That is the extent to which the judge has said she will allow testimony regarding Scientology. They can only talk about issues that deal with their state of mind with respect to not having reported these crimes to the authorities for many, many years. Now, with that firmly in mind, once the first Masterson victim took the stand, Jane Doe 1, the prosecutor asked her a series of questions designed to paint the picture that she grew up in this circle of Scientology friends. She went to a Scientology school, that the majority of her friends were Scientologists. The following back and forth between the witness, Jane Doe 1, and the prosecutor is why the defense asked for a mistrial. And I'm just going to read this more or less as it's reported. Prosecutor: so you have this core group of friends, and it seems that most or all of them were Scientologists. Jane Doe 1: correct. I would have to think of an exception. Who was an acquaintance but not a core friend? Prosecutor: is there a reason why most or all of your friends were Scientologists? Defense objects. Judge overrules. Jane Doe 1: growing up in Scientology, there are policies against seeing non-Scientologists. Now, at this point, Judge Almeida stops to give an admonition to the jury that Scientology policies are not being admitted for the truth of the matter, but to explain the state of mind of the witness. The prosecutor continues: there were certain policies. Did they impact you with relationships with others? Jane Doe 1: it was frowned upon to fraternize with the enemy and WOGs. The defense objects, and once again, Judge Almeida repeats her instruction to the jury. Prosecutor: so those policies that you became aware of that you were instructed to review, that made an impact on you? Jane Doe 1: correct. Prosecutor: you mentioned the word enemy. What did you mean by that? Jane Doe 1: not one of us, not someone who had been enlightened or engaged in Scientology. Prosecutor: what did you mean by that? Jane Doe 1: the goal of Scientology is to clear the planet. Defense objects. This time, Judge Almeida sustains the objection. Prosecutor continues: you mentioned WOGs, people who were not Scientologists. Jane Doe 1: you could get in trouble for spending time with non-Scientologists. The defense objects again. This time, Judge Almeida takes a break and they recess court for the day and have a private meeting with the attorneys where the judge basically ripped both sides. She ripped the prosecution for bringing too much Scientology into the testimony in a way that wasn't directly relevant. Perhaps it might be relevant later on, but isn't relevant now. And then also ripped the defense for objecting every single time practically the word Scientology was mentioned. Now, one of the primary problems here that I'm just going to editorialize about is that Scientologists don't consider non-Scientologists to be the enemy, and the prosecution and the witnesses need to be very careful when they're treading on this territory, because on the defense side, their entire case rests on characterizing these women as being untruthful. And the defense has a lot of very experienced Scientologists to rely on who are going to jump all over any slightest inaccuracies that are set up there on the stand with respect to anything, but particularly Scientology. In Scientology, the enemies are the psychiatrists, the psychologists, Big Pharma, but mostly because of their affiliation with psychiatry and psychology, and big bad suppressive people, people who are against Scientology or oppose Scientology. But Scientology does not see or view or consider non-Scientologists to be an enemy. In fact, Scientologists want all non-Scientologists to become Scientologists. I think one of the things Scientology is very well known for is sort of constantly recruiting anywhere and everywhere that they can. It's a bit silly to say that Scientologists see non-Scientologists as the enemy. So once the judge dismissed the jury to have this private meeting with the attorneys, and it's not really private so much as it is not in the presence of the jury, the prosecutor, the deputy district attorney, was asked by the judge to answer up for why he was permitting this testimony or elicited this testimony about non-Scientologists being viewed as the enemy. And Deputy D.A. Mueller said, "We were trying to lay the foundation of the nature of the relationship of the Scientologists, a tight group, not so much interaction with people outside. The point of that is because that becomes relevant if they are concerned about declare orders, losing family, losing friends, to understand the significance of what that means. Those would be the people who ended up turning on them." And the judge responds, "But that's not where you went this afternoon." See, there's a difference between explaining why Scientologists would be predominantly surrounded by Scientologists and saying that Scientologists view all non-members as the enemy. These are not really two same trains of thought, which is one criticism, but the other criticism is that it's also not a true statement, which is very problematic. Deputy D.A. Mueller continued, "I was asking about relationships with her friends and relationships outside the church," and the judge says, "I understand that Mr. Cohen," the defense attorney, "Mr. Cohen's concern was her testimony that outsiders are considered the enemy." Deputy D.A. Mueller says, "That was spontaneous. That had not come out in our discussions before. The purpose was to explain the relationships with other Scientologists to lay the foundation, the impact of a suppressive person declare." So it does seem to me that this was perhaps an honest mistake of the witness getting a bit flustered, being on the spot. I imagine the stress of being up there testifying. I can't even imagine it, actually. It must be horrendous. But nonetheless, painting outside of the lines is going to give the defense more ammunition than they need. They're going to be they're already looking for every little thing that they can jump on. And there simply isn't any policy or belief in Scientology that says non-Scientologists are enemies, or that you're not allowed to fraternize or associate with non-Scientologists. I mean, this should actually be very obvious on its face. Look how many Scientologists work in industries that are dominated by non-Scientologists. This applies obviously to high-profile people like famous actors, but then even just, your average rank and file Scientologist. Most of them live and work in the outside world and have lots of friends outside of Scientology. Now, the point the prosecution was making about why maybe 90% of the people in a young Scientologist's life would be Scientologists is relevant to the case. The painting outside of the lines comes in when you start saying, Scientology has policies that says non-Scientologists are the enemy and you are prohibited from fraternizing with the enemy. Now we're into the world of inaccuracies and embellishments. And again, I don't think any of that was intentional. Is fraternizing in general sort of a buzzword in the world of Scientology and something that is frowned upon? Yes, but it's something that exists in the Sea Organization and it applies to different levels of management. International management is not allowed to fraternize with middle management or below. Middle management may not fraternize with continental management or below. Continental management may not fraternize with service delivery level organizations and below. This is enforced to such an extent that even married couples, if one of the married couple is promoted to a higher level of management, they are oftentimes forced to divorce because of this prohibition against fraternization. This just simply doesn't apply to the world of public Scientologists and non-Scientologists in the outside world. After all, how is any Scientologist going to recruit some non-Scientologist friend to join Scientology if they don't fraternize with non-Scientologists. And that's what I mean when I said the falsity of this thing is obvious on its face to anyone that's really paying attention. And yet at the same time, it is also true that a Scientologist is very likely going to have a vast majority of Scientologist friends. Both of these things are true at the same time. The prosecution has to be able to make their points without slipping and mischaracterizing basic Scientology tenets, because the defense is going to go, if you guys can't even get it right when it comes to something that has been hugely important to you for the majority of your life, how is the jury to believe that you're getting it right when it comes to something that happened one night almost 20 years ago? Do you see the slippery slope that the prosecution is on here? That's why this is so terribly, terribly important. Now, when it comes to everything else that happened yesterday, the opening statements, there was no big surprises. The prosecution laid out its case of just all the facts and the sequence of the facts and everything that, very much points to Danny Masterson's guilt. And the defense is resting its case, or building its case, on what they claim are a series of inaccuracies in the original reporting that was done and what some of these victims have said over the years. I didn't find the defense's opening statement about the so-called inaccuracies or inconsistencies to be particularly compelling. And if the inaccuracies or so-called inconsistencies that they laid out in their opening statement is the best that they've got, well, it doesn't seem like they have that much. But we'll see. We're only one day into the testimony. This trial is scheduled to last for about 4 weeks. We should have some more compelling news to share with you later today or tomorrow. That's all on this for now, everyone. Thank you for watching. Thanks to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.